Hey everybody, welcome back to another fun and exciting intermediate math class. Today we are going to be jumping into lesson 2 in your book that is found on page number 8. So go ahead and open up your book to page number 8. Here's what you should always be doing when I'm teaching on these videos. Have your book open, have a pencil in your hand. Sorry about that. Have a pencil in your hand and be writing notes, okay? So circling things in your book, writing notes in a notebook, doing the work with me. Be what I call an active learner. Don't be passive. Don't just sit there and watch the video. Be actively trying to learn, okay? Work hard, and I think you will have great success in this class. All right, let's look down here. We are on page number 8 in your book, and we are going to talk today really just about different types of numbers. This might be review for some of you, but others of you maybe have never heard these different things before. So, number 1, the first type of number that we want to talk about is what's called a counting number. It's exactly what it sounds like, a number that you use to count with. Notice that I did write down the word natural, right? That's another. Sometimes you'll hear people call these natural numbers or counting numbers. It means the same thing. So these are all non-decimal or fractional numbers except for 0. What does that mean? Well, it can't be a fraction and it can't be a decimal. In other words, you don't count, you don't say 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5. You don't count with fractions. You say 1, 2, 3. You don't count with decimals. You don't say 1, 1.25, 1.5, 1.75. That doesn't make any sense. We don't count with fractions nor decimals. We also don't count with zeros. Think about this. You don't say, okay, on the count of 3, go. All right, ready? 0, 1, 2, 3. No, you don't say 0. You never count with the number 0 because 0 means nothing. And so you don't count with 0. So you start with the number 1 when you count. So you can think of counting numbers as whole numbers except for the number 0. Which brings me to number 2. What is a whole number? A whole number means all the counting numbers that we just talked about plus 0. So again, fractions cannot be included, decimals cannot be included. So all the counting numbers and 0 gives you your whole numbers. All right, the next one here are the positive numbers. Well, what is a positive number? It's exactly what it sounds like. Any number that is positive. What does that mean? Any number that is bigger than, that is greater than 0. So the number 1, that's a positive number because it's bigger than 0. If you have 1 pencil, you have more than 0 pencils. Okay? Now this one does include fractions because you could have 1.5 pencils. Maybe you've broken a pencil, maybe you sharpened it all the way down to halfway, so you have 1.5 pencils. You say, well, technically I have 2 pencils. Well, it depends how you look at it, right? So if you broke it, you definitely have half of a pencil. And so this would include fractions and decimals. You could have 0.5 of something. You could have 6.2 of something. Anything that is bigger than 0 is a positive number. The inverse of that, or the opposite of that, would be a negative number. What's a negative number? Anything smaller than 0, right? Anything, including fractions and decimals, anything that's less than 0. Like maybe your bank account has negative money in it right now because you have borrowed money from somebody. So you have negative money in the bank. Okay, that would be a negative that's less than 0. In other words, you owe somebody some money. Think about this. 0 is like a reference point, right? So 0 is like the reference point for freezing on the Celsius scale. So if you are measuring temperature in Celsius and you have a negative 2 degrees, so in other words, if it's less than 0, right? So negative 2 is less than 0, negative 2 degrees. 0 is freezing. That means that it's negative, it's below freezing. And so, like, freezing point of what? Well, the freezing point of water, that's our reference. So that means that at that point, your Ice, your water would be turning to ice if you put it in the freezer. So it's a reference point. 0 can be a reference point, and then you can have negative numbers that are smaller than your reference point of 0. The next one, number 5, is an integer. What is an integer? Well, it's all the counting numbers and their opposite numbers. So in other words, all of the counting numbers, the positive counting numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and all of their negative or the opposite, so 1 and negative 1. Okay, that would be the opposite. So integers would be like, I could write some, so like 1, negative 1, 10, negative 10, all right, things like that, all the way up. Now, you don't have to have all of their negatives. You could say, well, negative 4. What is negative 4? Negative 4 is an integer, right? Okay, because it's a counting number. 4 is a counting number, and then its opposite would be negative 4. What else is negative 4? It can be multiple things on this list. Negative 4 is also a negative number, right? Is it a whole number? Well, is it a counting number? No, you don't count with negatives. You don't say negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, typically. So counting numbers would be more the positive numbers. Is it a whole number? No, because that's counting numbers with 0. So the only thing that it would fit into is negative numbers and integers in this case. All right. The next thing that we want to talk about, the next thing, I think this is on the bottom of page number 8 in your book, and then on to page number 9, is what we call the number line. What is the number line, and how can we use the number line? So I've written kind of a definition and then some extra things here. So let's talk about this. A number line is a straight line on which the numbers are plotted. What does it mean to plot something? To plot means to put, right? So if I put a number on a line, that's called a number line. Ooh, by definition. Look, that's easy, right? Next, it extends indefinitely. What does that word mean, indefinitely? Well, that's why if you look down here, I have this little arrow here and this little arrow here on this other side. So on the right and the left, there's these little arrows. What does that mean? That means that that line keeps going in both directions and never stops. Now, we can't really draw a line into infinity, right? That's not possible for us because we run out of room on our paper. So in order to draw the line to kind of look like it just keeps going, we put that little arrow on the end of it. Next, it says to the right of 0 is positive. What does that mean? Well, let's look at this. Let's put a reference point. We don't have a reference point on this yet, so let's put 0 as our reference point. So anything to the right of 0 is going to be positive. So this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Going in the other direction to the left, look what it says right here. To the left is negative. So anything to the left of that 0 is going to be negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, and negative 5. So going to the right, okay, so this way is all going to be positive. Going to the left this way here is going to be negative on the number line. Numbers get larger as you move to the right. So watch this. So as I keep moving, so move one space to the right. So I went from 0 to 1. If I go again, then I'm at 2. Go again, then I'm at 3, 4, 5. It keeps getting bigger and bigger the farther that I go to the right. Now watch this. Let's say that I'm at 4, right? So we'll start at 4. What happens when I go 1 to the left? I go to 3. So what's happening to the number when I go to the left? And then I go to 2, 1, 0, negative 1, and so on. What's happening there? The number is getting smaller. When I go to the left, the number gets smaller. So notice it says smaller as you move to the left. Okay, bigger when you move to the right, smaller when you move to the left. 0 is typically the reference point of a number line. It's not always, depending on like if it's a graph or if it's something that you know is dealing with big numbers or really little numbers or something. Maybe it's a science project that you're trying to write and you're writing your scale or something like that. Then you would use a number line, but maybe 0 would not be your reference point. Most of the time, especially in math, and especially in this class for what we're doing, this 0 right here, that's going to be our reference point on the number line. That way we kind of see how many it's going left or right. All right, the next thing in the book is the absolute value of a number. What does that mean, absolute value of a number? Well, here's the definition. The definition says the total number of spaces a number is away from 0 in either direction. So, in other words, whichever, if you're moving to the right, if you're moving to the left, it doesn't matter. It's how many spaces you move away from 0. So, for example, let's take the number -4. How many spaces, or let's use the word units, how many units is it away from 0? Well, let's go ahead and count that. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4. So that would be 4 units. We're just going to call it 4 units for right now. Okay, now let's go over here and let's look at the number +4. How many units is it away from 0? So 1, 2, 3, 4. It is also 4 units away from 0. So in other words, -4 and +4 have the same what's called absolute value. They are both 4 units, okay? This number of units, okay? And so we don't write it with a positive or negative sign. It's just 4. And you don't even have to say 4 units. So the answer to this would be, what's the absolute value of -4? It's 4. What's the absolute value of +4? 4. Okay? 4 units, 4 spaces from 0. That's absolute value. Absolute value is typically written with, let's say we use the number -4. When you want the absolute value of something, you write these little brackets outside of it, 2 little sticks, okay? So whenever you see a number inside of that little bracket like that, those 2 little sticks, those 2 little straight lines, that means that it wants the absolute value. So what is the absolute value of -4? We just did it. It is 4. What is the absolute value of 4? Or we could write +4. It is also 4. 4 units away from 0. All right, the last thing here that I have for you in this lesson is on page number 9 in your book. It's right at the bottom of page number 9, and it talks about what's called comparing numbers. What does that mean? Well, when you compare something, it's you take 2 things and you say, okay, what is the same about this, or what is different about this? You're making observations about those 2 things. Well, when you compare numbers, there's only 3 relationships that the number can have. The first relationship is that a number can be greater than. When it's greater than, you're going to use this little sign right here, and it looks like kind of like a little arrow, but it doesn't have the stick, you know, like an arrow does. It just kind of has the arrowhead on it. And the greater than is always pointing, so this arrow is always going to be pointing to the right, okay? And then less than would be the next one, and this little arrow is always pointing to the left. And that's the easiest way to remember greater than and less than. I've seen some other ways to remember it, but to me, that's the easiest. And here's the one I like. I said this one is to the left, the less than. Look, less than and left. That's easy to remember, right? L and L. The other one, obviously, greater than and right, they don't match. But less than and left, that matches. Now, the other way, the other thing that it could be is equal to. What does that mean? Well, it could be the same number. All right, so let's talk about this. Let me show you this. So let's take 2 numbers. Let's take 8 and 10. Okay. Now, 8 and 10 have a relationship to each other. What is that relationship? Let's go through these different relationships right here. Is 8 greater than 10? No. Is 8 less than 10? Yes, it is. So we would use this one in this case, and we would say 8 is less than 10. And that would make this a true statement. If we switch the order of those and we said let's put 10 first and then 8, okay? So we'd go back through our questions. Is 10 greater than 8? And you would say yes, it is. So in this case, it would get the one that goes to the right, okay? And then you could also have two numbers that are same. So if we have 8 and 8, in this case, we would say, okay, 8 is not greater than 8. 8 is not less than 8. 8 is equal to 8. So we would use the equal sign. So it's either going to be greater than, less than, or equal to. Those are your three options with numbers. Okay, so we talked about names for numbers, or how we classify numbers. We talked about absolute value, and then we talked about the relationship that numbers can have. And you might say that's kind of a shorter lesson. Hopefully I'm going to keep these lessons to about 12-15 minutes most of the time. And I will try to do my best to keep it moving so that you can watch these and then just start doing your work, okay? So that's all I have for you. Hope you learned something. Have a good one. Bye-bye.